Welcome to Mystic Constellations, a mostly astrology podcast. Do you want fresh ideas that tap your healing potential? We'll explore the spiritual aspect of astronomy, playing the cosmic tunes of both the science and spirit of the stars, planets, and asteroids. Here we remember that astrology is sacred astronomy. We are infinitely curious, feminist, playful, creative, whimsical, and intuitive, yet logical. The Mystic Constellations podcast celebrates the complexities of self and leaves you excited to live, love, and learn. Here's your host, Noah Frere.
Everybody, this is your astronomologer, Noah Frere. So today, I'd like to celebrate the northern solstice, where the sun reaches its highest point in the sky and the longest day of the year, by having some fun with a book called the Corpus Hermeticum. Now, this translation is from 1999, the Corpus Hermeticum. However, the book is called The Way of Hermes, so if you're interested in more, you can always pick up this edition or some other edition. This edition, I like the way they talk about it in the foreword, and it seems like it's modern and tries to honor all the important stuff and is fair-minded and all that. So basically, this book was written a couple thousand years ago, more or less. We don't know exactly when. It's probably compiled from different manuscripts, potentially. The author is credited to be Hermes Trismegistus, who is like a kind of a mythical character and a syncretic combination of the Greek god Hermes with the Egyptian god of Thoth. So whether or not this person or deity was real is beyond most of our knowledge, but if you know, then let me know. So it's a pretty short book, and each chapter is called a book, and there's about 16 books depending on how you break them down. It first came to Western Europe in 1471. That's when it was translated into the Latin by the famous Marsilio Ficino, who is really awesome. And so it was very influential on the Hermetic movement of the Renaissance and that whole time period. So what is Hermeticism? It is a kind of like a religion or an ancient mystical tradition that's not so dissimilar to things like Buddhism. Basically, it describes an experience called gnosis, which is akin to enlightenment. And it kind of states that the individual is really no different from the supreme truth. Now, there are different variations on these kind of belief systems. And I get some red flags from this particular book, the Corpus Hermeticum. However, I haven't read the whole thing yet, so that could be part of my problem. So instead of reading the whole thing and then talking about it, I like to kind of typical Aries style, in the words of, I believe it was Austin Coppock, shoot first, aim second. So I'm going to talk about what I have read just a little bit, just like 3 short sections, and relate it to something really not related to Hermeticism so much, which is our modern theories of how the solar system evolves. So basically, I'm taking this ancient tradition and like drawing comparisons to modern solar system theory, okay? It's not going to be a super long podcast, and I'm just going to quote very short quotes and then kind of very briefly discuss them. I just thought it'd be a fun way to celebrate the solstice. So the whole point of this book is to like guide one towards enlightenment, essentially. So you can kind of think of it, it's not like so descriptive as prescriptive, perhaps. While I was reading it, I was struck by they were using this light and dark very descriptively. And there's a cosmogony, which is a model of how the universe began. In the beginning of these books, of this work called the Corpus Hermeticum. And it just seemed like it almost offered itself some kind of like when the sun first comes to light and like starts moving out into the darkness. So while I'm reading this first portion, imagine, if you would, the sun actually bursting into light and and its relationship with the darkness, okay? Also, I'd like to say something about, like, as often, patriarchy and the difference between, like, spirit-centered spiritualities and soul-centered spiritualities. In the cosmology, in the astrology that I practice, I use the sun to represent spirit and the moon to represent soul. And they're both equally important. Whereas you may say the sun is more essential, being consciousness and consciousness itself, and vitality and will with a capital W, the will to do things. Soul is more relevant because it's how we embody all the energies here in our body, on the earth, in our experience. So we might be like living from a place of sun, but we're experiencing just as much moon or soul. All right, so I'm going to read this first little section. It's 1.5. I don't think it's necessary to read 1.1 through 1.4 for the point of this podcast. Book 1, 4. When he had thus spoken, he changed in form. They're talking about this, his like, the author of this, Hermes Trismegistus, is talking to his teacher, who is like some kind of divine form of, like, can show Hermes the nature of existence. When he had thus spoken, he changed in form, and forthwith, upon the instant, all things opened up before me, and I beheld a boundless view. All had become light, a gentle and joyous light, and I was filled with longing when I saw it. After a little while, there had come to be in one part a downward moving darkness, fearful and loathsome, which I experienced as a twisting and enfolding motion. Thus it appeared to me. I saw the nature of the darkness change into a watery substance, which was indescribably shaken about and gave out smoke as from fire, culminating in an unutterable and mournful echo. There was sent forth from the watery substance a loud, inarticulate cry. The sound, as I thought, was of the light. So, if you can imagine being the sun first bursting into light, and then its filaments are like on, emerging from the surface as like solar flares or what have you, and the magnetic fields, which are all twisty and everything, are like real wild in the beginning, you might imagine. And they're like going out into the darkness. Well, from the sun's point of view, from the photon's point of view, it's like going out into this darkness, and its field of view is twisting and warping. So that kind of reminded me of that. So, but interestingly, the blackness was already there. From the light's point of view, the light was first because that's all it knew until it encountered space. As its photons were released from the heat of the sun, it would encounter space and like move out into space and actually move into this nebula. The protoplanetary nebula is like this collection of gas and dust that's just swirling around. And as it's swirling, it's getting denser and denser, and that's what causes the sun to eventually form. It ignites when it gets like real dense and real hot. So it's almost like the photons are moving through the solar system, through all of this material that is just existing out there in space from previous suns and stars that had exploded and left their mark on the cosmos. Or there's a bunch of hydrogen gas from the inception from the Big Bang. So, yeah, that's part of it. And one thing, let's see, there's something where it says, okay, so this is 1.5. That was actually 1.4, yeah. So here's 1.5. Out of the light came forth the holy word, which entered into the watery substance, and pure fire leapt from the watery substance and rose up. The fire was insubstantial, piercing and active. The air, being light, followed the breath, and mounted up till it reached the fire, away from earth and water, so that it seemed to be suspended from the fire. Now, this next line is important. The earth and water remained in their own place mingled together, so that they could not be distinguished, and they were kept in motion by the breath of the word, which passed over them within hearing. So there's some kind of using the word with a capital W is reminiscent of Christianity, but Hermeticism existed before Christianity, FYI, I believe. So that when they mentioned that the water and earth remain together in this like nebulous form, it had not. It's like a protoplanet. It's like all this stuff comes together from gravity, and it becomes what will later become a planet, but it hasn't differentiated yet. It's still forming. So later on, they talk about how the will of Nous, like the mind of God, actually creates like forms, like separated the water from the earth. And so we have all the elements here: fire, air, earth, and water. Now, there are indications in this text that darkness is bad and light is good. And this is a red flag to me. So I wanted to know if this text shows darkness as being as primal as light. In what I previously read, it sounded like darkness came out of the light. But as we previously discussed, the darkness was already there before the star, started shining. So in this model that I'm using for the nebular solar system model. So I read forward, and in 1.8, it says, as I stood, that's Hermes Trismegistus, as I stood amazed, Poimandres is the deity who's teaching him, spoke again to me, saying, you saw in Nous is kind of like the mind of God, the first form, which is prior to the beginning of the beginningless and endless. So that's a weird thing to say, as cosmology is wont to be, before the beginning of the beginningless and endless. To me, that sounds like the first form, darkness, is very primal. But it's not really clear to me exactly what they mean there. Let's see here. It does seem to suggest, though, that it's always present to me. So I'm looking at my notes here. Yeah, I'm weary of spirit-dominated cosmologies. This is definitely a spirit-dominated cosmology, since I believe the physical universe is primal and ever-present in one form or another. I cannot imagine a universe in which physicality doesn't exist. I cannot, and I will not. It serves no purpose. It makes no sense. If you can, then we have a different philosophy. That's okay. Whereas we talked about the sun and moon analog, and in terms of patriarchy, this next section 1.9 is actually promising. It says, Nous, God, being male and female, beginning as life and light, gave birth, and so on and so forth. But it does state Nous is male and female, and that's good. And they also talk at some points about there being no gender. So that's a plus in terms of patriarchy. Also, let's see, I should read maybe the rest of 1.9. Yeah. Nous, God, being male and female, beginning as light and life, gave birth by the word to another Nous, the creator of the world. He, being the God of fire and air, formed 7 powers who encompass in their circles the sensory world, and the governance of these powers is called destiny. So you saw 7. There's 7 traditional planets in Hellenistic astrology, and they are linked to fate. So this free will fate thing's already getting going, where it suggests that volition belongs to the realm of spirit and fate belongs to the realm of physical or soul, which is, not contrary to my view of the sun as being will. All right, so later in 1.25, they talk about a journey through the 7, shells or spheres of the 7 planets, which is really cool. So I'm going to read those, and then I'm going to relate them to the planets. They don't name the planets. They just take you on this short journey. It's very short. It's just a few sentences. And then while I was reading, I was like, oh, those sound like the planets. All right, 1.25. Thus a man starts to rise up through the harmony of the cosmos. To the first plane, he surrenders the activity of growth and diminution. To the second, the means of evil, trickery now being inactive. To the third, covetous deceit, now inactive. And to the fourth, the eminence pertaining to a ruler, being now without avarice. To the fifth, impious daring and reckless audacity. And to the sixth, evil impulses for wealth, and all of these being now inactive, and to the seventh plane, the falsehood which waits in ambush. So if you, there's an order of the planets as they used to conceive them based on the speed that the planets move from our perception. And we can link that order with these 7 things. So the first one was growth and diminution, obviously the moon. The moon is closest to us, so it moves the fastest from our point of view. It really cruises across the starry background compared to the other planets. And it grows and it gets smaller as it waxes and wanes. 2, trickery. Mercury, Hermes, is the trickster. 3, covetous deceit. Venus. Venus has to do with not only relationship and love and beauty, but with like desire and value, like what you value. So like there is a place for like wanting things in Venus, and so covetous deceit. Whereas deceit would be just they're listing all the bad parts of the planetary expressions, because we're moving through beyond the bad parts. We can move to the higher levels of nous. 4, ruler, sun. Sun is always the ruler in ancient astrology. 5, daring and reckless audacity, obviously Mars. 6, impulses for wealth, that's Jupiter, because he wants more. He's like expands stuff, and Jupiter does bring us wealth. And 7, this one was a little trickier. Falsehood waits in ambush, Saturn. Saturn's one of the malefics, like Mars. I never thought of him as being falsehood. I don't normally personally associate Saturn with truth, but I'm sure I would not be surprised if many astrologers do. And because Saturn is about being responsible, and he's like the teacher in many astrologers' view. And I also consider him to be a teacher. And he will reward you if you grow up and do well, and he will not reward you if you don't. So the ambush part, it's like if you're not actually facing your own, higher nature or truth or reality, Saturn's like about reality too, then he's like an ambush coming to get you. He's like karmic almost, right? So that was really interesting. So although I haven't read this whole thing yet, I just want to kind of share some of these thoughts with you. And in my worldview, soul and spirit must be combined in some kind of eternal way that matters. Otherwise, I can't make sense of life. And I did read something in book 6.1 that suggests that might be true for this text. And so I'm just going to read the first 2 lines of that. 6.1. The supreme good, O Asclepius. So this is now Hermes talking to Asclepius, because he became a teacher after the first book. Hermes understood universe, reality, and now he's teaching others. The supreme good, O Asclepius, is not in anything, if not in God alone. Rather, the supreme good is always God himself. If this is so, it is the real nature of all movement and of all generation. So to me, that suggests they're saying that everything that happens is really God in some form. That is clearly true to me. However, in the very next page, they completely break that down. They get completely dualistic, and they say that truth and God is one thing, and everything else that's not God is something else, and is illusion, and is dark, and is not good. So it becomes not... I don't understand why they go there, but again, I haven't read the whole thing. I really need to, and then, interpretations and whatnot. It is a very ancient tradition, and it's very smart, and it's very interesting. And I guess that's all I have to say about it. So happy solstice. I hope you can find some light in the darkness, and see you around.